Everybody. Good morning. That little segue before we started, where I found the tick crawling on my head. Perfect, because what's my topic today? Do ticks deserve compassion? Now, when I formulated this idea for the talk a little earlier in the week, and then the last few days I've spent some time outside. And so now I'm adding black flies to the list of creatures that it's questionable whether we should have compassion for. And in anticipation of what'll be coming in another week or two, because they're not here yet, I'm also going to add mosquitoes. So ticks, black flies, mosquitoes. Do they deserve compassion? Do they even deserve to be on this earth? And I discovered this, I didn't know this, not here in the Northeast, but there's places where, or even in the US, but there's places where even the black flies carry diseases, which I did not know. I knew that about ticks and mosquitoes, but there are black fly-borne diseases. And it seems to be the way the world is going. The fact that they're not here yet should not give us any comfort. There are even black flies can kill livestock by exsanguination. So they definitely are on the list of things we don't know. Can we, should we, do we want to have compassion for these beings? And there may be others, right? I mean, but because it's also sort of hard to figure out the value. If it's something like a rattlesnake, I'm not a big fan of rattlesnakes, but they have a value. If you don't have rattlesnakes, the mice and rats go wild. So the snakes serve a purpose. What's the purpose of a tick? Right? Was this just an era, evolution gone haywire, that put these things among us? Mosquitoes. If you ever have a chance to read Nine-Headed Dragon River, that's a book by Peter Matheson. It's a lovely little book. It's not that well known, but it's great. It's based on his journals from two trips that he made. One trip that he made was, one trip was to the Himalayas, to Tibet, when he was writing the book, The Snow Leopard, and he and a biologist friend were searching for snow leopards. And his notes from there, but his more spiritual notes and his encounters with Tibetan Buddhism and so on. And the other one is a trip that he and Bernie Glassman and some others made to Japan. Again, this is many years ago. But prior to the Japan trip, Peter also talks about his some of his early experiences in Zen, and even prior to being in our lineage, he was in the Rinzai lineage at Daibo Satsu in New York. I forget. Soen Roshi, I think, was the teacher there, and there were some notable scandals there. But anyway, but Peter talks about sitting a session with a mosquito buzzing around him. The gymnastics that he goes through, because he can't move. This is a Rinzai Zendo. You're not moving. No way, no how. And this thing is, and so Peter's trying to channel his energy to drive the mosquito away. It's really kind of a humorous little description, but it wasn't particularly humorous probably for Peter at the time. So even mosquitoes could be significant nuisances, particularly for Zen practitioners. Unless at Treetop, there's 2 doors to get to the Zendo, so that you don't get many mosquitoes in there. But Some places you do. Anyway, so should we have compassion for these creatures? Let me back up. I want to talk about some definitions. I'm going to start with the definition of compassion. What is compassion? And what I'm going to say is that compassion is the unobstructed awareness of another being's suffering. Or we might say of another being's condition. Okay, the unobstructed awareness of another being's suffering or condition. Now, that word unobstructed is extremely important in this case, because we can be aware, but also allow it to pass through the filter of our ego, in which case it's contaminated, it's transformed, and it's no longer compassion. The example I often give is of encountering a person who's not housed, who's living on the streets. And we're walking along, and all of a sudden we're confronted by this person, not by confronted in a physical way, but just by their presence. And if our response is completely unobstructed, is completely natural, and we feel drawn to this person, drawn to respond to this person, drawn to acknowledge them in some way, that is compassion. But we usually add something. We add the filters, the obstructions. You know, is it okay? Is it safe to approach this person? You know, do I really want to? They probably want money. They're going to be a pain in the ass. They might follow me home. I don't know. We'll have all these things that come up in our mind, many of which have been sort of conditioned there by cultural messages. And so no longer are we seeing this person's suffering as it is, but we're seeing it in relationship to us, our happiness, our well-being, and so on. No longer compassion. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that's not compassion when we speak of compassion. I saw a little video this weekend. I don't know where it came from, but and the guy that's the active narrator in this video is walking along, and there's a man sleeping by the side of the road. And I mean, this is in an urban setting. He's obviously not out having a picnic or something. And so the guy goes over to the guy that's by the road is like that. He's huddled, and the guy comes over and says, "Hey, are you cold?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm freezing." He said, "Would you like a hoodie?" And he, yeah, you know. So the guy goes away, and he comes back, and he brings him a hoodie. And the man by the side of the road is extremely grateful. And then the guy says, "Oh, you're probably hungry. Would you like something to eat?" The guy says, "Yeah, yes, please. I'd love something to eat." So he goes over, there's like a burger joint across the way. He comes back, he's got something, food, burger and fries or a Coke or something, some food for this guy. And the guy is extremely grateful. Now, the chances are that whoever made this video made it for clickbait, right? They have some agenda. Perhaps their agenda is simply instructing us on what compassion looks like, because that's what compassion looks like, unhesitatingly. Do you need something to put on to be warmer? Do you need something to eat? And he responds to the suffering of this man. No conditions, no, you know, well, I'm only going to get you a hamburger because I don't want you to spend the money on alcohol or something like that. you know, he just responds. Now, again, my guess is the fact that they were filming this whole thing, his intentions were something else, like becoming an influencer or something, but maybe not. And maybe it was just to show us, yes, this is what it looks like, folks. It's not complicated. It's not difficult, right? It didn't take hours out of his day to be kind to this human being, to be compassionate. So compassion is the unobstructed awareness of another being's suffering, adding nothing other than that immediate, there's something. And it doesn't need to be a human. It could be a tree, could be an ecosystem, could be a dog, anything, right? But we see the suffering, we respond. Now, I want to just contrast that for a moment with loving kindness. Excuse me. That's something that we speak about. We speak about it in the Buddhist Zen peacemakers' tenets, right? We respond with loving kindness. Okay. So loving kindness, as I'm going to define it, is, once again, the unobstructed response, in this case, to our compassionate awareness. In that story, when the guy goes and gets a sweatshirt, a hoodie, when he goes and gets a burger and whatever, that is loving kindness. That is the expression, the manifestation of the compassion. Loving kindness is compassion in action. And once again, it's important that it be as unobstructed as possible. You know, within, obviously these things always have limits, but as unobstructed as possible. It's just immediate response. Oh, you're hungry, I'll get you food. Oh, you're cold, I'll get you something to warm up. Very simple, direct. I add something else to this list of responses, which I'll call a non-egoic loving response. A non-egoic loving response. And it's different from these other two in that it's also unobstructed, but it is an unobstructed outpouring of emotion. The best place that I can explain this here, that when I drive from where I am to Belfast, which I do often because that's where we do most of our shopping, there's an oak tree that we pass, and I love that oak tree. I absolutely love that oak tree. In fact, I'm going to regret, the oaks are a little slower than other things with their leaves coming out. So it'll be another couple of weeks before it leaves out. And I'm going to regret that because the form of the branches of this tree are so beautiful that it's almost a shame to cover them up with leaves. It just, so it now that love is largely selfless. I gain nothing from it. We could love a beautiful sunset. Right? It touches us in an emotional way. It touches our hearts, our spirits. It moves us. But it's not about us. It's not going through the filter of the ego, ideally. Not the same as the loving kindness, because the loving kindness is as an activity that arises out of the compassionate awareness. It's a response to our compassion, our compassionate seeing. And as I said that, I heard a squirrel, and once again, my compassion is going to be tested. So, those who don't know, I've had an ongoing war with the squirrels for several years. They've destroyed our porch. They've destroyed all the screens on our porch when we were away out west. They got into our house and did a certain amount of havoc. And so the squirrels and I are not on the best of terms. But I'm not tempted to kill the squirrels. Well, I shouldn't say that. I would not act upon the thought of killing the squirrel, but I am seriously thinking of deporting them, live trapping them outside and taking them someplace different. But then I thought, well, they've got babies now, so I better not do it now. I got to wait till the little ones grow up. I'll have 10 times as many squirrels to get out of here. Anyway, so these things, right? These are part of our life. They're here. And so they also come up against our precept, right? We have the precept of not killing. Precept of not killing. Can we kill ticks? Can we kill mosquitoes? Can we kill black flies with impunity? Right? Anybody ever done that? Right? We're killing. Well, I'm going to just a quick sort of a segue here. My conclusion out of all that controversy about the Dalai Lama is that I still love the Dalai Lama. I still have tremendous respect for the Dalai Lama. And I may refer to him from time to time in that context of as someone whose opinion I respect. I hope that will not make anyone uncomfortable. If it does, please let me know of a side conversation, and I will reconsider that. But at least at this moment, I still consider him a very wonderful human being, far beyond anything that I will accomplish in this lifetime. And I respect his opinion. Oh, so he has said it's okay to kill mosquitoes. All right. Now, I'm not sure exactly what he's based that opinion on, but he said it's okay to kill mosquitoes. I don't think he'd ever been confronted by black flies or ticks. I imagine that he would have included them as well had he known about them. So clearly, we're sort of allowing this exception, along with many others, to the not killing, to the precept of not killing. We're saying, oh, maybe it's okay to kill these things. Dalai Lama says it's okay. But I want to return to the initial question. Should we have compassion for them? There's a woodpecker pecking on the side of the house. The whole natural world is rising up in opposition to my talk. Anyway, so, and my answer is yes, absolutely. Some of you may disagree. I believe we should have compassion for them, which is not the same thing as saying we shouldn't get rid of them. You know, there was a time, many of you remember this, there was a time before children had electronic devices when they used to entertain themselves outside. And little boys in particular came up with some very ingenious things to do out in the natural world, such as frying ants with a magnifying glass. Now, ant frying is a completely gratuitous activity. It serves no purpose other than sheer sadistic glee, observing the suffering of the ants. Right? That's what it is. But when we're talking about killing these things that are causing trouble, putting us in harm's way, and so on, that's a very different thing. It's not sadistic. And so I think the important thing, the measure of the compassion should be our regret at doing it. We may need to do it, but I feel as if we should always be a little bit sad, a little bit regret that we've had to do that we've had to take the life of another being. As Zen Buddhists, I think that's part of our obligation anytime we violate the precept of not killing. Anytime that we don't do it gratuitously, we don't do it gleefully, we don't do it sadistically, that we have some measure of regret. Maybe we even do that more than symbolically. We apologize to the whatever being it is that we have inflicted the harm on. You know, I think that the precept of not killing, well, it's by its nature, it sounds absolute. And therefore, it's impossible to keep it perfectly. And therefore, that allows us to make these decisions. I will hurt this and I won't hurt that. I will avoid this, I will not avoid that. And maybe to set up an equation, you know, is it better for me to kill the tick than to get any one of the wonderful diseases that they carry these days, all of which are quite serious, potentially life-threatening? And so my answer is, yeah, I'm going to do that. But I never feel good about it. And I somehow think that's important. And I don't know, you know, there would be many people in this country today who would think that that's absolutely effing nuts. Why should we care? Why should we hesitate about killing insignificant nuisance creatures? And, you know, I'm going to make this connection. I think it may seem far-fetched and hyperbolic, but I don't think it is. It's a path. There's a direct path from there to shooting somebody who pulls into your driveway by mistake. There's a progressive disregard for life and a progressive elevation of our ego and our self-importance. So if I am so important, and if the taking of life is so unimportant, then I can presumptively shoot somebody who comes into my driveway just on the chance that they might have some evil intent, unpleasant intent. Again, this might sound hyperbolic, but I think that when we disregard the least creatures, we are building the path to disregarding all creatures. When we don't take life really, really seriously, we're in danger of falling into callous disregard. This is probably my biggest objection to hunting culture. While I don't do it, I have no particular objection to hunting when it's done respectfully, when it's done with an acknowledgement that the life of an animal is being taken, a valuable life, and that there is some measure, I'm going to say regret and respect involved in that thing. It's not indifference. It's not, bam, I kill something. It's, oh, I've killed something, And that's, a lot of that is lost these days too, It's all about bragging rights and showing off and about the ego. It's not about feed the family. That's articulated, but that's secondary to machismo, to showing off, to building my ego. So these phenomena are related. In my mind, you may say, I'm nuts. So this is why I would encourage us all to extend the reach of our compassion as far and wide as we can, and to include every being. We used to say sentient beings. We don't say that anymore. We say the vows. Why? Because we realized that sentience was another exclusionary category that really wasn't relevant. All beings. So we changed it to creations are numberless. I vow to free them, right? Creations, all things, not just sentient things. Besides, panpsychism, things like that are saying that these things are sentient anyway, regardless of whether or not they are. Everything is worthy of respect, caring. I have a friend who's Passamaquoddy who was out walking with an elder one day. And they were talking, and the elder picked up a stone to show him something, and then he took the care to put the stone back in the exact same spot that he had picked it up from. Put the stone back in the exact same spot. And that was the teaching that he was giving. Now, it's hard to even imagine that degree of loving kindness towards the natural world, that we would take the time to place a stone back in the position that we found it. But I hope that example should bring us up short. We may not do that. We may never have that degree of respect, or we may say, oh, it's not a big deal. It's just a stone, blah, blah, blah. But I hope that example will make us reflect more, whether we're interacting with other humans or with the natural world. What is the effect that we're having? And how do we mitigate any harm or destruction that we might cause as we go through this world. I think we talked about last time. We cannot avoid doing harm. And unfortunately, as we approach 9 billion of us doing harm, there just may be no happy ending. But at least we can do our best. We can do our best. We can be aware. We can apply compassion and loving kindness. Thank you.
Once again, you have struck right on the nerve of what's been going on with me. Mine is, what are those things called? They're the bugs in the grass that eat all your grass up, and then you have bald spots on your yard. But anyway, so grubs, that's what they're called. And that's been torturing me this week, is the grubs have eaten my lawn. And do I put all sorts of chemicals down, or do I say, screw it? The birds are eating as many grubs as they can, and they're just, I guess I'm just going to have dirt instead of a nice grass lawn in the suburbs. So it's really interesting that you brought that up. So I had some other thoughts when you were talking about when you disregard the least of the creatures, you're disregarding all the creatures. And I would also add that we're all connected. So if you do something here, that's going to affect something over here, right? So you have to be mindful so that, as you said, with intention, when you do things, if I do put down bug fertilizer or bug killer, or you kill the tick or you swat the fly, with that little bit of, before you take the action, I think that balances it. If you sort of, as you said, apologize beforehand and go, and don't do it every day and don't do it all the time, but maybe just this once. So I think the intention is part of that. If you were in the woods and a bear was chasing you and you had a gun, yes, you should shoot the bear probably and make it stop chasing you. So there are instances where killing, I think, is appropriate, but again, not wanton, doing it with our connection to everything in mind. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we're going to get over into the realm of deep ecology a little bit, and but it's possible to make radical choices. There was, probably some of you remember the bear guy. I don't know what his name was, and he was so opposed to killing bears, he was eaten by a bear eventually. And he did not protect himself by killing the bear. That's a very radical choice. but it's in the continuum. But what deep ecology says, and I think this is one of the reasons I like do people know deep ecology? Maybe I'll back up just a little bit. It was developed by a Norwegian philosopher, Arne Næss, and also another philosopher, George Sessions. And it's a set of principles basically describing, I'm going to say, sort of an ethical way of interacting with the world. And what deep ecology says is we shouldn't have any interactions with the natural world that we haven't carefully considered and considered the options, the alternatives, and sought out the path of least harm. But deep ecology is also pragmatic. So it says that if after we have had this process of consideration, we feel that we have no alternative but to go forward, we go forward. But imagine how much less destruction there would be if every time we considered what the options and alternatives were before we acted. You know, to your example, Molly, how many of your neighbors just automatically put poison on their lawns? Never considered making pie out of the grubs or some of the less harmful alternatives that are available. But seriously, but that's, the knee-jerk reaction, and there might be something, I don't know what it is because I don't know that much about grubs, but that, encourage more birds to come or introduce snakes. I don't know, but something that would solve that problem short of chemical fertilizers, which would be chemical insecticides, I'm sorry, which would be the worst alternative, right? And often those things are not selective. They're going to kill a bunch of things and they're going to get into the ecosystem, into the water, right? So ecology says, first and foremost, we've got to consider the options and we've got to look at the least harmful options. It doesn't say we can't interact with nature, but it says we've got to mitigate our impacts and make our impacts as small as possible. And if we just did that, that would be such a huge leap forward. Would it be perfect? No, but it would be a quantum leap in terms of our relationship to the natural world.
Peter, I have a question about the word unobstructed awareness or an unobstructed response. I can very much feel that in the sense of non-egoic, loving response. If I listen to, on public radio, they have a StoryCorps project, and people come on and tell these really touching stories. And I listen to the story, and without any kind of mental effort, I just tear up. I mean, it's unobstructed. It just comes, and I have a reaction of emotion. But being unobstructed in our minds, I think, is sort of ego-less, and that's a difficult state to achieve. And so for developing compassion or loving kindness, I don't think we can wait for an unobstructed awareness to happen. It seems like we have to remember, oh yes, remember the precepts, remember this talk, remember what we have been talking about, and then act, as you said, if you're going to analyze what is the least destructive way I can use, that's really thinking things through quite a bit, not unobstructed. And I also think of advice when nonprofit that I belong to would talk to divorcing or separating parents who are very angry at each other, and I don't want to have to smile at her. And the advice would be given, well, fake it till you make it. And it was kind of amazing how sometimes that changed over time. So maybe it's just splitting hairs, but the unobstructed part of it, I can see the emotion, but I think compassion, at least for most of us, we have to think through a little bit more. Ooh, sorry, the wind is blowing. So that's a question I have.
No, question. Some good thoughts. And it's a good question. I think in my experience, most of the time, and maybe not all the time, I've never really analyzed it that deeply, our first reaction is the compassionate reaction. You see the child about to be hit by the car, you want to run, right? You're going to grab that child out of harm's way. You don't even have to think about it. I haven't thought about it. If you start thinking, then you're thinking, well, I might get hit by the car if I do that. And, and I don't really like this kid anyway. I don't know. We start creating these things, and so in one sense, I don't think we need to do a lot to have the compassionate response. It's what we don't have to do that, which is to begin to add on. We see the person on the street. Our first reaction is, oh, suffering. And then we start, I don't know, maybe they got a disease, maybe they got this or that. They're kind of dirty, maybe they did this to themselves. Why don't they get a job? All the things, and those are all in our culture, right? And so, and like it or not, we pick those up and those thoughts pop in. So to me, an obstructed is what comes before all of that. Now, it may take some work to get back to that state once all of the various tropes have come into the, into the picture. And so it's work, and it takes attention, and, and that's why we practice. The bottom line is we want to get better at that. We want to get better at that. We want to be able to override. If I have a poor reaction, I often have poor reactions. Just cut me off on the highway, and you will get to see one of my poor reactions. But I'm trying to get better at that. I'm trying to let go of that anger, that fear, whatever it is that causes, that territorial, my lane, and don't you get in it, or whatever that's going on in my, and back to, nothing happened. It's okay. Not a big deal, and I don't need to react. But I often react first, and I have to correct myself. And fortunately, most of the time I correct myself before that turns into an action. Occasionally it does turn into an action, and then I regret it. And then, but then it's like, oh, there's stages. Okay, I regret it. Now I've got to atone in some way. I've got to try to do better. I may not catch it. But at least for me, that's what a lot of my work is about, is getting better at catching it, and of not forming the thoughts or the attitudes that are going to put me in that position in the first place.
Which would be awareness of what's going on. So,
yeah, and openness. If I'm in a really open
right.
state, if I'm like, it's beautiful spring day, and I'm just open, it takes a lot to get me upset. If I'm already, and doesn't take much. So a lot of it's also just about the kind of general state of our minds.
One thing, an example of it, this whole process they came up for me is, when the 9/11 conspirators were being tortured by the Bush administration. I was very much against that, because I think it's a slippery slope if you start pretending obviously torture is not torture, which they were doing. But I couldn't feel compassion for the 9/11 conspirators being waterboarded to get information that could hopefully, help us prevent more of those things happening. I was, just so angry, I had an office in New York that was right, before I moved to Maine, that was right in the area, was covered with ash and everything. I went there later to visit. I wasn't there at the time. But you know, sort of on a reflection, something I see about it is that you know, they sort of had these ideas that took over, that controlled, you know, that made them do certain things. They had ideas that made them do certain things. And what I really hated was maybe those ideas, you know, which had taken them over, but they are still suffering beings, you know. And, you know, so, but that takes, you know, that takes a little thought for me to get to, you know. I mean, you know, my immediate reaction is, you know, fuck them, you know. And so I think that's an example of the, at least for me, that my compassion was completely, I didn't have compassion because the anger was so much. And I'll just also mention that I was very, when this thing about of Tucker Carlson, this text came out, he said, white people don't do things like that. This crazy racist stupidity, you know, if you think of like the Ku Klux Klan, what they did. I mean, it's just, it's moronic. But in that text, also, like he basically talked about what glee he felt at and pleasure he felt at this Antifa guy getting beaten up by these three people. But then he goes into, but then I think, you know, they, you know, there's probably somebody that cares, is this guy's mother, and probably cares about him. And, you know, and how are we better than these Antifa people if we just give in to this kind of, so Tucker Carlson was thinking of, you know, he was doing actually a process like what we're talking about, you know, sort of using his mind to try to, I don't know, but in his case, it seemed like the reason was because he wanted to feel like he was better than the Antifa guy. And how could he feel that way if he was just taking glee in the suffering? You know, it seemed like it was all ego, even there. So anyway, these are some thoughts that come to my mind.
Well, thank you for the thoughts. I mean, I think some of the things you describe, it's just precisely it. We're going to have times when we react with anger, when we react with fear, when we react with hatred. Those are our natural reactions to a certain extent to certain circumstances, right? That are just so horrible or so painful or so whatever that we react. You know, when I used to work with the mindfulness-based stress reduction stuff, you know, and they make a distinction between a reaction and a response. And it's sometimes useful, the reaction being, bam, that's it, our immediate, you know, and the response as something that comes later, when we can step back a little, away from our anger, away from our fear, away from whatever it is, and reevaluate the situation and respond in a way that's more appropriate, right? So that's what you described, sounded a lot like that kind of a process. And so, you know, there are going to be these situations. You know, I talk mostly about the animal world, but certainly with the human world. Look, when we go back to the instance of the prisoner who's done something really, really horrible. You know, the 9/11 terrorists, for example. Can we have compassion for them? Should we have compassion for them? And I would argue yes, compassion for the person, for their suffering, not for what they did. And if they deserve to be punished and never see the light of day for the rest of their lives, so be it. they are committed to harming other beings, and as such, they relinquish their right to live among other beings. But, it doesn't negate the possibility of my having compassion for their fundamental being and for what they were before they were damaged, before they were indoctrinated, before they, whatever the circumstances are. And these are struggles. I mean, to sit and, to use 9/11 is such a powerful example, and I mean, I was here in Maine, but I sat mesmerized by the horror of it, and couldn't get away from the screen for hours. And was I feeling compassion for anybody at that moment? Yeah, for the people who were suffering, the New Yorkers who were killed and wounded and so on, and not for the terrorists. It took me a long time to have any measure of compassion for them. And then to me, it's a very conditional compassion. It's like I feel some compassion for those human beings, for who they were, who they could have been, and yet, do they belong locked up for the rest of their lives? Yes, I think they've earned that. Torture being a whole separate subject that I don't want to get into, but right now anyway. But
So, you know how we have things in our lives that just are such, powerful memories, certainly each of us. And I've told you this story before, Peter, but I haven't told it to the rest of you. So, right, just a couple mile walk from here, there's a lake and there's a little town beach there. And I was down there one day. It's really tiny, so you don't have a lot of people, but people are down there with their kids. And I can be there in the morning and there's not another soul there. But I was there one afternoon and I was reading, and sometimes the little kids will fish there, and with their little fishing poles and stuff like that. And it's, I don't like it, but they catch these little sunfish and stuff, but they unhook them and they let them back, and, it's what they do. So anyway, these two boys were in the water and they caught a fish and they were having trouble getting the hook out. And so I stood up and went into the water and said, just hold the fish under the water while you get the hook out so it doesn't die. And this woman came storming into the water, grabbed it from the boy's hand and yanked the hook out and threw it away and looked at me and said, so what if it was their mother, obviously. So what if it dies? There's a million more where this one came from. And it took my breath away to be the witness, to hear her words. And I mean, without even, immediately there was the judgment from me of, oh my God, what is she teaching her children? But I couldn't speak. I just quietly stepped back and, sat down and, and afterwards, kind of thought of all the things I should have said and, kind of course, beat myself up a little bit for not speaking up. But it just so speaks to what you've been talking about to me, if that disregard for life, and how that disregard for these little tiny fish and saying there's a million more, how that can lead us to, you know, generally not valuing life. And and of course, I mean, you know, Gary, you just spoke about, you know, your perspective when it all happened and, you know, that changing. I don't think there's any other way for us to be in the world except for having a reaction to something. And then, you know, as time goes on, developing some compassion about the situation, the person, whatever it is, and, you know, learning from that so that the next time something like that happens, I mean, I react, but it's not as big a movement anymore for me to feel compassion towards the perpetrator of things, because I know that when we're born, that's not who we are. And we're taught, you know, in culture to become what we become. And, you know, but it's just an awareness again, you know. It's Peter, isn't there a story, a Zen story about the man, I don't know, lost on the mountain or something, and there's a rat maybe that's diseased, and he eats the rat, saying, you know, so what, you know, it's a diseased rat anyway. And and then, you know, the story goes on to talk about what that diseased rat, the effect of eating the diseased rat on the ecology of does that sound familiar to you at all? No. Okay. I don't know where I read it. So anyway, that's really my only thing to say is, so as I've gotten older and, you know, reviewed things that I reacted to with hate or wanting to hurt someone else, that's gotten quieter in me because of my experiences, and also though because my Zen practice, and so we're not perfect.
We are not. Thank you. But that's a great story and a horrible story, but it's a good story. On going back to 9/11 for a moment, on 9/11, who exhibited compassion?
The first responders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They ran in to save lives without any regard to their own life. Right? They didn't stand around thinking, oh, Lord, if I go in there right now, I'm going to breathe things and blah, blah. No, they just ran in and did their jobs, you know. And I think that, you know, everything subsequent is kind of running through the obstructions, through the filters. And sometimes Gary had a really good point. I mean, sometimes our reactions are just so powerful that we have, you know, at least in the moment, we don't have a choice. We really need to step back and have some space and some time to readjust, recalibrate ourselves.
I have to share when I think about that mother running into the water and throwing the fish. What comes up for me now at age 66 is compassion for her.
Mhm.
I'm imagining this poor, I'm just saying, I'm imagining our culture, what might have been true for her, that at that point she was hysterically desperate. Maybe she has 5 more kids at home, or maybe these 2 are making her crazy, whatever. We don't have a support culture. So she's not being supported. Her kids are not being supported. And then, God forbid, the kids are now trained. There are 1,000 more where this one came from, but the thing that comes up for me is kind of a funny story. Gary and I took the kids on a trip. Remember this, on the plane? Little beautiful boys on the plane. And they were running every once in a while up and down.
No.
Oh, I don't even know what they were doing.
In this story, our kids were just sitting. They were talking to each other and laughing.
Oh, that's what it was.
They were laughing. They were having a good time together. And there was this woman who was sitting like 6 rows up from us. She comes back and she's like really angry that we're not controlling our kids to make them not be laughing and disturbing her.
This one, my husband was so upset.
I couldn't.
He was so upset. It was when we got off the plane, so I didn't bear the brunt of it. He did. He was so upset. And then I thought later, she probably doesn't have kids. She has no idea that it's a fucking miracle, pardon my French, that the kids were laughing on the plane rather than, God forbid you get on a plane, kids are crying. It was,
to be so
but she
angry
didn't
about
know. She didn't know.
children's laughter.
Meanwhile, this one was still upset about it.
Respond to it. I just couldn't believe it.
So it's exposures, it's wisdoms, it's experience, and I believe that in a better world, so to speak, there's more interaction so that people can actually have more compassion for each other, because part of compassion is, it's unobstructed, but that is, as Susan was saying, that requires training and focus to get there. But on the way, there's mutuality, holding each other. So what could you have said? It would have been extremely, I think, putting myself in your position, challenging for you to have been able to say something that could have landed with her with compassion and taught the kids something with compassion.
I think it would.
You couldn't make her wrong.
Actually.
That doesn't work. You can't take over as the mom.
Yeah.
But if you could be heard as an elder, if you were integrated, if you were the wise elder that everybody knew already, somehow your presence could have been more effective.
Yeah.
But you're an observer feeling sad about that's the message. Hard to intervene, hard to be present in a way that's, anyway. But we can help each other. Just saying, we're here, we can hear each other. We have community. And so we combine our wisdoms. So you're an elder here because you're understood and heard and seen.
I can't help but to think that we don't know what the impact was. It's possible that even though she didn't say anything and she just kept quiet or walked away, that there was a little seed planted in either one of those kids' minds of, oh, there's perhaps another way. Or, being just mindless and saying, okay, there's more. It's not the only way or the right way. So I like to think there maybe, even though you may not know it, something was, planted in there somewhere.
I have to add, that is so important. What you're saying is so important. That we do our best, and even if we feel helpless, that we don't know what we could say. You were present. That's beautiful. We're present with and trying to figure out what could be said or done. That's got to be important too.
Okay. So the sun has made it here. And I'm going to go out.